Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I hereby declare open the second meeting of the 33rd special session of the Human Rights Council. We will now proceed with consideration of the draft resolution A/HRC/S33/L1, entitled Situation of Human Rights in Ethiopia. I would like to remind you that the voting process is a members-only process. Observer states may only intervene in two instances: in case they are main sponsors introducing a draft proposal, or in case they are countries concerned. Apart from these two cases, observer states will not be in a position to take the floor, not even on a point of order. The Secretariat has verified that all representatives of the states members of the Council wishing to take part in the voting process, as well as the representatives of the main sponsors of the draft resolution and the concerned country that would speak, are present in the Zoom meeting. The meeting has been locked and we can now proceed with action on the draft resolution. As decided by the Council this morning, should there be a request for a vote, we will apply the same extraordinary modalities for electronic voting as were applied during the 30th special session of the Council held in May, and as articulated in Annex 2 of the minutes of the Bureau meeting of the 14th of December, circulated to all delegations yesterday. Allow me to highlight the main points of these modalities. We will start with a test vote using the e-recorded votes module on the e-delegate platform. Once this vote is completed, we will proceed with the consideration of the draft resolution before us today. We will follow the same standard procedure for voting as in previous sessions. The consideration of the draft resolution would proceed via the Zoom platform in the same manner as it used to be in room 20. The main sponsors of the draft resolution would introduce their text via Zoom, and members of the Council would also participate via Zoom or pre-recorded video messages to make general comments and explanations of vote before the vote. Should any state member of the Council wish to make a procedural motion as part of general comments, the representative of that state would be able to do so by 1. Pressing the raise hand button, or by indicating the motion in the chat box and putting their camera on. I would also like to remind you that in accordance with Rule 128 of the Rules of Procedure of the General Assembly, a sponsor of a draft proposal or an amendment is not permitted to explain his or her vote on his or her proposal or amendment. Finally, the general speaking time limit during the voting process is 3 minutes for all. Should there be a request for a vote on the draft resolution, I would ask the Secretariat to activate the vote on the e-delegate platform. For security reasons, the system may periodically log representatives of the states members of the Council out of the e-delegate platform. Therefore, before opening the vote, I would ask representatives to log out and log in again. Once I ask the Secretariat to activate the vote on the draft resolution, representatives will then see the draft resolution appear on the e-recorded votes module of the e-delegate platform, upon which they would be able to electronically cast their vote on the draft resolution. Representatives may also need to refresh the page by clicking on the refresh button in order for the draft resolution to appear on their screen. I will proceed slowly with the vote in order to allow all states members of the Council to have ample time to cast their vote. Should there be more than one representative for a state member of the Council connected to the e-delegate platform and casting a vote for that state, the platform would reflect the last vote cast by a representative of that state. Representatives would be able to change or delete their votes so long as the vote remains open. Once all states members of the Council present and voting would have cast their votes and checked that their vote is accurately reflected on the e-delegate platform, I would ask the Secretariat to close the vote on the draft resolution. Once the voting is closed, representatives would no longer be able to change or delete their vote. A hotline 022 917 7218, I repeat 022 917 7218, will be in operation throughout the process in case representatives have difficulties communicating via Zoom any technical issue they are facing. We will now proceed with the test vote. I therefore request states members of the Council to now log in with their usual credentials on eDelegate and go to the e-recorded votes module on that platform, following the guidelines that were recirculated by the Secretariat on Wednesday. If you are already logged in on the platform, for the reasons I explained earlier, please log out and log in again. If all representatives are now logged in, I will ask the Secretariat to open the test vote. I invite all states members of the Council to cast their vote. A delegation not intending to cast any vote is invited to inform the Secretariat. We are still waiting for 2 countries to cast their vote. If these countries are facing any technical difficulties, please do inform the Secretariat. The Secretariat is verifying the situation with a country which has not yet cast its vote. We will wait for a few more instants. Apparently, there is a technical issue with one country, which is in the process of being fixed. We still need a minute or two to verify and fix the technical issue that one delegation is facing. The issue seems to have been fixed. I will ask the delegations if all representatives have cast their vote. Please verify that your vote is accurately reflected on the Zoom screen. If you face still any technical issue, this is the moment that you should inform us about the difficulty you are facing. I see no hands raised. I therefore ask the Secretariat to close the test vote. The voting is now closed. Ladies and gentlemen, having successfully completed the test vote, we will now begin consideration of draft resolution A/HRC/S33/L1. I give the floor to the representative of Slovenia to introduce the draft resolution on behalf of the European Union on Zoom.
Thank you. Mr. Vice President, I have the honor to present on behalf of the European Union draft resolution L1 as orally revised, entitled Situation of Human Rights in Ethiopia. From the beginning, our aim was to present a constructive and well-balanced resolution, urging all parties to the conflict to respect their obligations under international law, acknowledging and building upon the positive developments that have already taken place, and contributing to accountability efforts via the establishment of an independent international investigative mechanism. The text also reiterates our firm commitment to the territorial integrity and unity of Ethiopia, as well as our support to the ongoing mediation efforts led by the African Union. This is a resolution about the respect of human rights and fundamental values that we should all share and defend. Mr. Vice President, Our decision to call for a special session was not taken hastily or lightly, but only after careful consideration and thorough consultations with delegations from all regions. We strove to adopt the same transparent and inclusive approach in preparing the draft before you. We thank all the delegations who engaged constructively during the informal consultations and bilaterally. Our text has certainly benefited from their good suggestions in many places. We appreciated the opportunity to engage with the country concerned and regret that we were not able to engage substantively on the text, in line with the inclusive approach that we have always favored. It was never our intention to single out one party, nor to undervalue in any way domestic accountability mechanisms as we distinctly express in our text. And yet, in light of the prolonged conflict situation and given the seriousness of the allegations, it is clear to us that the international community has to assume its responsibilities and that this Council has to fulfill its mandated role, including with regard to prevention. Mr. Vice President, this resolution and the mechanism it proposes are, in our view, a positive and necessary contribution and complementary addition to ongoing efforts for peace and justice for the people of Ethiopia. We thus call upon all members of this Council to adopt this resolution by consensus. I thank you.
Thank you. I have been informed by the Secretariat that there are 12 additional co-sponsors to the draft resolution. We shall now hear general comments on the draft resolution as orally revised. I will now open the floor to members of the Council who wish to make general comments on the draft resolution as orally revised. The floor is open. I see there is no request for the floor, and therefore we shall now hear from the country concerned. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ethiopia. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We are appalled by the way some of the interventions were made before this August Assembly. They do not comprehend the gravity of the allegation they carry in misleading the international community. The accusations leveled against my country are unfounded and disregard the facts on the ground. We hate to remind those who took the floor that the finding of the Office of the High Commissioner and Ethiopian Human Rights Commission joint investigation did not find evidence to support the claims of deliberate or willful denial of humanitarian assistance to the civilian population in Tigray or the use of starvation as a weapon of war. In fact, humanitarian assistance has been flowing if it were not for the rebel group commanding more than 1,000 trucks. We sincerely believe that these polemics will only exacerbate the situation on the ground. Therefore, we urge all in this regard to refrain from making political statements before a Human Rights Council. Let us also once again underline that we do not see any merit in this politically motivated draft resolution. Let me conclude by appreciating all nations who allied with the African Group statement for their principled stand. Ethiopia is firmly committed to peace and human rights. I thank you.
I thank you for your statement. I have been informed by the Secretariat that there are PBIs for this draft resolution as orally revised in the amount of $2,939,200. They have been received and posted on the HRC extranet. We will now take action on the draft resolution A/HRC/S33/L1 as orally revised. I will give the floor to the members of the Council who wish to make explanations of vote before the vote on the draft resolution as orally revised. The floor is open. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Eritrea.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. As already made it clear, this resolution does not enjoy the support of the concerned states and neither the support of the African group. Therefore, we will be voting against the resolution and we will call a vote on this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other delegations wishing to take the floor? I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Russia, of the Russian Federation.
Господин вице-председатель.
Mr. Vice President, Russia confirms its commitment to the independence, territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ethiopia. We again reiterate that the holding of a special session of the Human Rights Council on Ethiopia does not facilitate the regulation of the military and political crisis in the country. Certainly, the situation on the ground remains difficult. However, the establishment of a new country mandate within the framework of the Human Rights Council, all the more without the consent of the affected country, is a measure that cannot be regarded as very effective. Russia bases itself on the principle that African problems should find African solutions. And in this connection, we reject any foisting of unilateral approaches on states. Moreover, we are convinced that in the context of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and the resources which are already restricted, we should focus our attention on the most important issues. Given what is stated above, Russia intends to vote against this draft resolution. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Venezuela.
Gracias, señor vicepresidente.
Thank you very much, Vice President. Venezuela states its firm opposition to the draft resolution S33L1 on the situation of human rights in Ethiopia. It is regrettable that its co-sponsors show no intention of having a frank dialogue with the country concerns and have opted for this politicized initiative, which they aim to use to establish a monitoring mechanism which does not enjoy the support of Ethiopia and which is undeniably destined to fail. Ethiopia has made it very clear that it is against this draft resolution, which undermines the investigation conducted by the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission and the Office of the High Commissioner. It is also something which will act as a barrier to achieving concrete results. Despite efforts made to tackle the conflict in the northern region of the country, Ethiopia has said that it is committed to implementing the recommendations which are included in the report. Vice President, Ethiopia has said that it is fully intending to continue to support and work with this council and its mechanisms, and it will comply with its national and international human rights commitments. So the presentation of this initiative lacks any grounding. This draft resolution is part of the selective and politically motivated action of its co-sponsors against a sovereign state. It violates the principle of sovereignty and non-violation in domestic affairs of states. That governments of these countries are committing serious human rights violations themselves, and there are no actions taken against them, which testifies to the selectivity which human rights issues are prey to. Venezuela will vote against draft resolution S33L1 and would urge other Human Rights Council members to do the same. Thank you very much, Vice President.
I thank you. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of China. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. Vice President, China always advocates constructive dialogue and cooperation in handling differences in the field of human rights. China opposes any politicization of human rights issues or use human rights issues to interfere in the internal affairs of other countries. We are deeply regret that the co-sponsors of the draft resolution, in spite of the rejection of Ethiopia and without respect to the mediation efforts by the African countries, try to use the L1 draft resolution orally amended to set up a country-specific mechanism against Ethiopia, which is an interference in the internal affairs of Ethiopia and undermines the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ethiopia. This is contrary to the purpose of the Human Rights Council, will only serve to exacerbate the situation and add an element of complexity to the solution. We are deeply concerned about the practice of the countries concerned. In view of the foregoing, China will vote against draft resolution L1 as orally amended. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
I thank you. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Philippines.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have the honor to read the following statement of the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Teodoro L. Locsin, on draft resolution S33/L1 on the situation of human rights in Ethiopia. Excellencies, the Philippines votes no to this resolution. It doesn't help the situation in any way. All it does is make the self-righteous feel justified in their mistaken self-importance. We usually invoke the so-called principle against country-specific resolutions. We do not do so in this instance. We are gravely concerned by the findings of the joint investigation report, including accounts of sexual and gender-based violence against women and children. It is even more heartbreaking that children are not spared. This cannot continue, but it will if we resort to the cheap tactics of sovereign usurpation by the last countries in the world entitled to substitute their judgment for that of the specific country concerned. We note that while the Ethiopian government has expressed reservations with some aspects of the GIT report, it has accepted and recognized the subject report. It has not disputed nor disregarded the report. Instead, it has set up an interministerial task force to oversee redress and accountability measures in response to these human rights violations. It has begun to implement the recommendations in the report, which we note was issued only a month ago. The Philippines welcomes these actions. The proponents of this resolution, on the other hand, want to intervene again and right away. While welcoming the Ethiopian government's decision to set up an interministerial task force to oversee redress and accountability measures, they are simultaneously seeking to create an international commission of human rights experts on Ethiopia to investigate the same allegations of violations and abuses to take over sovereign prerogatives. Why and who are they to do so? Even the independent Ethiopian Human Rights Commission itself is concerned that the international investigative mechanism proposed by the resolution duplicates the work of the JIT report and is therefore repetitive and counterproductive to ongoing implementation processes, and an unnecessary, indeed self-defeating measure to end the specific horror of that civil conflict that only further delays redress for victims and survivors and an end to the horror. The proponents must learn to respect and not preempt a sovereign state's prerogative to set up its own national accountability efforts and mechanisms to address human rights and humanitarian law violations. They must cease using the Human Rights Council for unilateral, undeservedly self-important actions that hinder cooperative and constructive efforts to change the human rights situation on the ground. In continuing to resort to these tactics, the proponents are weakening the Human Rights Council by turning it into an arena of condemnation and a judicial hall without due process, instead of a body for engagement, respect for sovereignty, and dialogue. As the Queen and Alice in Wonderland shouted, first the judgment of conviction and then the trial. The nerve coming from whom it does. The Philippines will not allow this. We vote no. Thank you. End of statement. The full statement will be uploaded to the internet. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you for your statement. Is there any other delegation wishing to take the floor for an explanation of vote before the vote? I see there is none. At the request of the delegation of Eritrea, the Council will now proceed to a vote on the draft resolution AHRC S33L1 as orally revised. I invite the members of the Council to log out and log in again on eDelegate at this moment to ensure that delegations are not locked out by the system for security reasons while the vote is taking place. Please note that your vote will appear on the screen with a 4 to 6 seconds delay. A delegation not intending to cast any vote is invited to inform the Secretariat. I now ask the Secretariat to activate the vote on eDelegate, and I request all delegations to register their vote. I invite members of the Council to click on the refresh button on the top left-hand side of the screen in case the draft resolution does not appear on their screen. Have all delegations registered their vote? It seems to be the case. I request delegations to check whether their vote is accurately reflected on their screen. If this is the case, I ask the Secretariat to close the vote now. The voting is now closed. The results of the recorded votes are as follows. In favor, 21, 15 against, 11 abstentions. Draft resolution AHRC S33L1 entitled Situation of Human Rights in Ethiopia as orally revised is therefore adopted. We will now move to explanations of vote and general comments after the vote on the text just adopted. Are there any delegations wishing to take the floor? It seems that this is not the case. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, with this, we have actually exhausted the list of speakers for explanations of vote and general comments after the vote and concluded action on the draft resolution. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to remind you that the report of the 33rd special session is currently being prepared and will be posted on the Council's extranet. Our Vice President and Rapporteur, His Excellency Paul Beckers, is entrusted with its finalization with the assistance of the Secretariat. May I take it that the draft report is adopted ad referendum? It is so decided. Delegations will have the opportunity to submit comments through the Secretariat within 2 weeks from the date of circulation of the draft report. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of this special session. I hereby declare closed the 33rd special session of the Human Rights Council.